A businesswoman recognizes her mother's brooch, who was presumed dead, on the dress of a new employee. She begins to investigate and discovers a devastating secret. Elena Bradford's office had always been a reflection of her life. Impeccable, organized, every detail carefully planned to convey success. The large glass window offered a panoramic view of the city she helped shape. However, despite the grandeur of her empire, that place hid a deep emptiness, invisible to others, but always present within her. Sitting in her leather chair, she watched the lights of the distant buildings, while her gaze wandered, trapped in memories that insisted on coming back. There was a photograph on her desk, an old, faded image from a time that seemed to belong to another life. Elena could barely recognize herself in the young woman smiling next to her mother, Sarah, during a family picnic. Her mother's smile, always bright, was the greatest memory left of a woman whose life was taken too soon. The accident that took Sarah from the world had been so sudden, so brutal, that even now, more than 20 years later, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something important had been left behind in that tragedy. Despite all her successes, something always seemed to be missing. The title of Businesswoman of the Year, the million-dollar contracts, the international expansion of her company, nothing filled the void left by her mother. Elena knew that if Sarah were alive, she would be proud, but in her heart, success felt bitter. It was as if with every achievement she tried to prove to herself that she could move on, but the ghost of loss was always lurking, in every corner of her perfect life. There were days when the pain of her mother's absence was as palpable as in the first week after the accident. Today was one of those days. Everything in the office seemed to have a darker tone, as if the brightness of success had been dimmed by an invisible shadow. Elena rested her elbows on the desk and held her head in her hands, trying to chase away the thoughts that surrounded her. She took a deep breath, feeling the familiar pang of pain in her chest as she remembered the last time she saw her mother alive, just days before the accident. Her mother had always been her anchor. Sarah had a serenity that seemed indestructible, a presence that made the world around her feel calmer, safer. Losing that security had left Elena feeling lost for years, even though she never admitted it to anyone. To others, she was a fortress, an unshakable woman who commanded with confidence. But inside, there was a young woman still searching for a piece of her mother, a final word, a last hug that never came. The clock in the office read 5 in the afternoon, but Elena was in no hurry to go home. She rarely was. The luxury apartment she had bought in the best part of town was always impeccably tidy, but empty of life. It was just another grand and cold space, reflecting the success she had built, but also the loneliness that accompanied her. Without family, without children, the only true company she had were the memories of the past. She thought about how different her life would have been if Sarah were still here. Maybe she would have chosen a lighter path, maybe she wouldn't have thrown herself so obsessively into work, in the constant search for something she couldn't name. She always wanted to be a strong woman like her mother, but the truth was, since losing Sarah, Elena felt like she was only pretending to be strong. The real strength seemed to have been buried with her mother that fateful day. The melancholy was interrupted from time to time by the sound of notifications on her phone or the distant echo of the voices of the employees still working in the building. But nothing could distract Elena from her thoughts that afternoon. She closed her eyes for a moment, imagining what it would be like to hear her mother's voice again. What would Sarah say to her now? Probably something encouraging, as she always did. "You will make it, my daughter. I'm here somehow," she would hear in her mind. A solitary tear rolled down Elena's face, something she rarely allowed. In that instant, even surrounded by all the power and prestige she had achieved, she felt vulnerable, a lost girl searching for answers. And once again, the cruel reality hit her. Success didn't bring back what she wanted most. That morning, the office was bathed in a soft light passing through the glass windows, gently illuminating the corridors. Elena was reviewing some contracts at her desk, but her thoughts were still scattered. Her mind was far away, lost in memories of her mother. Then the office door opened and Lily entered, a new employee recently hired by the Human Resources Department. Elena looked up, observing her with the professional attention she always maintained, but something about Lily immediately caught her attention. Lily seemed like an ordinary young woman at first glance. She wore a simple white blouse and black dress pants, the kind of outfit many wore in the corporate environment. But there was a serenity in her gestures, a contained gentleness in the way she moved around the office, which didn't match her apparent shyness. As she approached, Lily seemed to hesitate a little before speaking, as if she measured each word carefully. "Good morning, Mrs. Bradford. I'm Lily. I was hired for the marketing department." The voice was soft but clear, and Elena gave a slight nod, inviting her to come closer. "Welcome, Lily," Elena said in her usual tone, formal but not distant. She was always courteous to all employees, always maintaining a barrier between her position and theirs. "I hope you're settling into the team." Lily smiled, a shy smile that didn't reach her eyes, but there was something in her posture that piqued Elena's curiosity. The young woman seemed out of place, as if that wasn't exactly where she expected to be. However, what really caught Elena's attention was something much more subtle. While Lily spoke, slightly fidgeting with her hair as a nervous tick, Elena noticed the glimmer of something that made her pause for a moment. A brooch. The jewel pinned to the side of Lily's blouse was unusual, old, a delicate piece that contrasted with the rest of her simple outfit. It was a piece Elena never expected to see again. Her heart raced, the world around her seemed to stop for a second. She knew that brooch, knew it better than anyone else. It had belonged to her mother, Sarah, and had disappeared the day of the accident that took her. Elena kept her composure, but inside, a whirlwind of emotions began to form. How did that brooch end up in the hands of a new employee, a young woman who apparently had no connection to her mother or her family's past? Her gaze remained fixed on the object for a brief moment, as she tried to process the avalanche of thoughts emerging. Could it be a coincidence? But that jewel was unique, custom-made, a gift from her father to Sarah. It couldn't just be a copy. Lily seemed unaware of what was going on in Elena's mind. She continued to speak briefly about her goals at the company, her interest in digital marketing, but all Elena could hear was the muffled sound of her own breathing. The brooch, that piece of history she thought was lost forever, was there before her eyes, as if fate had decided to throw a new twist into her life. "Very well, Lily," Elena finally said, disguising the tremor in her voice. "I believe you'll find many opportunities here." Lily thanked her, bowing her head slightly before leaving the room, leaving Elena alone again. As soon as the door closed, the air in the office seemed to grow heavier. Elena leaned back in her chair, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to understand what it all meant. Her eyes remained fixed on the spot where Lily had stood just minutes before, as if the ghost of her mother had just passed by, bringing with her a mystery that, until then, Elena didn't know she needed to unravel. Elena stood still for a few moments, her eyes fixed on the door through which Lily had exited. Her heart was beating fast, but it wasn't because of the presence of the new employee. It was because of the brooch. That small, delicate gold brooch, adorned with tiny blue sapphires, was unmistakable. Elena felt a chill run down her spine as she recognized the object pinned to Lily's blouse. It belonged to her mother, Sarah. The last time Elena had seen that jewel was on the day of the accident, more than 20 years ago. Since then, it had disappeared without a trace, just like her mother. The brooch had always been one of Sarah's favorite pieces. Her father had it made especially for her on a wedding anniversary. Every detail of the jewel was unique, designed to capture the essence of her mother, elegant, strong, and precious. As a child, Elena used to admire the jewel in her mother's lap, enchanted by the way the sapphires reflected light in an almost magical way. It was a piece that carried more than just material value. It was the symbol of a happy time, a time when the family was complete. Now, seeing it in someone else's hands felt like a punch to the stomach. Elena's mind immediately transported her back to the fateful day of the accident. She remembered the morning her mother rushed out of the house, wearing a light gray coat and fastening the brooch to her chest as she always did. It was the last image Elena had of her. Hours later, the news came. The car had overturned on a deserted road, and Sarah's body was found in the wreckage. The brooch, however, was never recovered. Elena always thought it had been lost among the debris or taken by someone in the chaos that followed the accident. And now, there it was intact, gleaming on the chest of a young woman who, as far as Elena knew, had no connection to her mother or her story. The memories of that day returned with overwhelming force. She saw herself again on the side of the road, the smell of burning in the air, the sirens in the background, and the emptiness of watching her mother being taken away, without being able to say goodbye. The brooch, like a lost link, brought back the pain that Elena had fought so hard to bury. She rose slowly from her chair and walked to the window, trying to process what it all meant. How had that brooch, missing for more than 2 decades, ended up in Lily's hands? Elena felt a mix of disbelief and unease. Could it be a replica? But no, she knew every detail of that piece, every curve of the metal, every sapphire embedded. It was the same brooch. There was no doubt. What had started as a casual encounter was now turning into a suffocating mystery. Elena's mind began to race. What did this mean? Could it be that her mother had never died in the accident? The idea seemed absurd, but the evidence was right there, shining in the memory of a past that Elena had always believed to be closed. Maybe the accident wasn't what it seemed. Maybe there was more to it, something she had never known. The unease grew in her chest, and she knew she wouldn't be able to rest until she found an explanation. She forced herself to calm down, to take a deep breath, but it was hard to quiet the whirlwind of thoughts. Why was Lily, a new employee, wearing something so intimate and significant to Elena? Something was wrong, and Elena felt it with every fiber of her being. But at the same time, there was a part of her that didn't want to believe. A part that feared what she might discover if she started digging into the past. Time seemed to drag on, and Elena, now with her back to the city outside, knew she had to do something. That brooch couldn't be there by chance. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her mother's smile, felt the weight of her absence, and the brooch, which once represented affection and love, now brought a discomfort she couldn't ignore. Elena realized she was facing something much bigger than just a coincidence. The presence of that brooch at such an unexpected moment in her life seemed more like a warning from fate, something she couldn't simply let pass. She sat down again, now with a sharper focus, her thoughts clearing. Elena knew that her mother had been a woman full of secrets, but she never imagined that one of them would come to light so many years later, and in such a silent and mysterious way. The days following the encounter with Lily were quiet on the outside, but inside Elena, a storm was brewing. The brooch, now an impossible memory to ignore, pulsed in her thoughts like a piece out of place. Something didn't make sense, and she knew she couldn't simply ask the young woman directly about the object without arousing suspicion. Elena needed to be careful, shrewd. That was how she had built her empire, by observing, analyzing, and waiting for the right moment to act. Elena began her investigation with trivial questions. On that same day, while walking through the company's hallways, she made a casual stop at the Human Resources Department. "How's the new team?" she asked, as if seeking to stay updated on the new hires. The HR manager, a middle-aged woman who had known Elena for years, smiled and briefly mentioned the new employees. "Is Lily doing well?" Elena asked with restrained interest. The answer was vague but positive. "Yes, a reserved girl but competent," the woman replied, unaware of the turmoil it stirred in her boss. In the days that followed, Elena observed Lily from a distance. Discreet, always reserved, the young woman did her job efficiently, but something about her remained mysterious, like a shadow that went unnoticed by others. Lily didn't have many friends at the office, kept a polite distance from her colleagues, and rarely participated in more relaxed conversations. It was as if she was always present but somehow absent, out of place. This only heightened Elena's curiosity, who was now beginning to weave a web of questions in her mind. In team meetings, Elena began to notice small details that might have gone unnoticed before. The way Lily would avert her gaze when they talked about origins, or when someone mentioned their families. There seemed to be an intentional silence, an involuntary retreat in the few interactions she had with her colleagues. This reinforced Elena's suspicion. Lily was hiding something, and Elena was determined to find out what it was. She also started to gather informal information. In a casual lunch with some company leaders, Elena made an offhand comment about the new talents and mentioned Lily in a complimentary tone. "She seems focused," one of the managers said. "But I don't know much about her, really. She's discreet, almost invisible," he added, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. Those words echoed in Elena's mind. Invisible. But why would someone choose to be invisible, especially in an environment where professional advancement depended so much on standing out? Elena also took advantage of the presence of her personal assistant, Clara, a perceptive and trustworthy woman, to discreetly investigate. "Have you had a chance to talk to Lily?" Elena asked one casual morning. Clara, always attentive, raised an eyebrow and replied, "Not much actually. She doesn't talk much about herself. But she's polite, maybe a little shy." This only deepened the mystery. Clara, who could extract information even from the most reserved people, had managed to get only a superficial impression. As the weeks went by, Elena's curiosity mixed with growing suspicion. She knew she needed more than casual observations. She started requesting small reports, reviewed with more attention the projects Lily was involved in, searching for something that could give clues about her origin. But up until that point, everything seemed perfectly normal. Professionally, Lily was impeccable, without visible flaws. It was as if she had built an unshakable facade, a wall that Elena still hadn't managed to break through. Elena also began to visit Lily's floor more often than usual, always with plausible excuses. She was subtle, never intrusive, just enough to continue her observation without raising suspicion. One day she stopped for a brief chat with one of the supervisors. "Lily seems like a good hire," she commented. The supervisor agreed but didn't have much to add. She's quiet but does her job well. She comes, does what she needs to, and leaves. Nothing extraordinary. But it was exactly this that troubled Elena, the absence of any personal detail. The young woman seemed to live inside a carefully constructed enigma. There were no distractions, no friends, no comments about her life. Every time Elena tried to pull a thread, it dissolved into the air, leaving only more questions. That night, Elena's office was quieter than usual. The building, which during the day buzzed with the energy of employees and the hum of corporate activities, now seemed like a sleeping giant, illuminated only by the dim light of the monitor in her office. Elena, alone, seated in her leather chair, was immersed in research that troubled her. Lily's story, which had remained a mystery until then, was now starting to reveal small fragments, loose clues that made her wonder if the past was really as buried as she had imagined. The keyboard of her laptop echoed in the office's silence as she tirelessly searched through files, social networks, and any database she could find about Lily. There wasn't much available. It was as if the young woman's life before working there was a massive black hole. Everything that surfaced seemed meticulously erased or absent. Until, in an obscure registry forum, Elena found something that made her stop and take a deep breath. Lily, it appeared, had been raised in an orphanage on the outskirts of a small town, miles away from there. The name of the orphanage, St. Mary's, appeared in an incomplete adoption document. Elena frowned. An orphanage? That wasn't part of any of the conversations she had heard from Lily, or from the few details shared by other employees. The young woman had never mentioned anything about parents or her childhood. In fact, she rarely talked about herself. But now, with this new information, the mystery surrounding Lily seemed even bigger. If she had grown up in an orphanage, how did she come to possess Sarah's brooch? The question hammered in Elena's mind, and the more she tried to find answers, the more the story seemed to complicate. Hours passed, and the light from the screen continued to illuminate Elena's tired face. She clicked from one document to another, analyzing the files with surgical attention. The St. Mary's orphanage had closed over a decade ago, making the investigation even more difficult. However, among the few remaining documents, she found something that left her breathless. A record of a girl named Lily who had been found at the orphanage's doorstep as a baby with no identification. No parents' names, no note. Just an abandoned child left to fend for herself. Elena's heart raced. Why did this information disturb her so much? Something deep in her mind began to stir, as if an uncomfortable truth was about to emerge. She clicked on a few more links, now searching for any information on possible adoptions or connections to the outside world, but found nothing other than mentions of a woman named Margaret, one of the orphanage's nurses, who seemed to have a close bond with young Lily. The name Margaret didn't mean anything to her at first, but Elena felt that she should keep digging. Who was this woman? Could she have had something to do with her mother's disappearance? And more importantly, how had the brooch, such a personal and valuable piece, ended up in the hands of Lily, a young woman who didn't even know her true origins? The mystery deepened, and the sense that something much larger was hidden beneath the surface made the air around her feel denser. As the clues began to emerge, Elena started to build a mental picture, a web of possibilities. It was clear that Lily wasn't just an ordinary employee. There was a story there, a secret, something that connected her life to Sarah's. But what was that connection? Could it be that Margaret, the nurse, held some clue that could unravel this enigma? Elena knew she would have to dig deeper to find answers. The documents in front of her didn't provide all the answers she had hoped for, but they shed light on a past that Lily seemed to have buried, or maybe never truly knew. Raised in an orphanage, with no known parents, with a brooch that belonged to a woman presumed dead in a tragic accident. It all seemed too surreal to be just a coincidence. Elena, despite her exhaustion, felt more determined than ever to follow the trail of this mystery. The clock read late into the night when Elena finally leaned back in her chair, her eyes tired but her mind racing. What had started as simple curiosity was turning into a personal investigation, a plunge into dark, unknown waters. She knew she couldn't stop now. The brooch was the key, and no matter how much Lily tried to hide it, consciously or unconsciously, Elena was determined to uncover the truth. Ana Lucia's house was a refuge of memories. Every corner, every piece of furniture seemed frozen in time, as if life had stopped decades ago. Elena entered the old mansion with a strange feeling in her chest. It had been years since she last saw Ana, a close friend of her mother's, but at that moment she needed answers. After the discoveries about Lily and the mysterious connection with the orphanage, Elena felt that there was more to the story than she had imagined. If anyone could clarify her mother's past, it would be Ana. Ana Lucia was sitting in the garden, surrounded by flower pots she tended with the same care as always. Her hair, now gray, swayed gently with the wind, and her eyes lit up when she saw Elena approaching. "Elena, my dear, what a surprise!" she exclaimed with a warm smile, which quickly faded when she noticed the seriousness on the young businesswoman's face. "Is everything all right?" she asked with the intuition of someone who knows the buried secrets of a family. After some small talk about life and the time that had passed, Elena, unable to hide her urgency, went straight to the point. "Ana, I need to know more about my mother's past. Recently, some things have surfaced that have left me with many doubts. Do you know if there was someone she hid from us? Some secret that might have been left behind?" The question hung in the air, heavy, loaded with expectation. Ana averted her gaze for a moment, hesitant, as if deciding whether or not to speak. Sarah was a strong woman, but there were things even she couldn't control. Ana began, her voice softer, almost a whisper. "I don't know all the details, but I remember conversations, rumors at the time. Your father, Elena, he had many enemies in the business world. One in particular, a dangerous man, resentful. They said he had something against your family, something personal." Ana paused, as if the words to come were too heavy to say. Elena's heart raced. Who was this man? Ana took a deep breath and continued. "His name was Samuel Donovan. He owned a rival company to your father's, but the resentment wasn't just about business. They said he held a personal grudge over something that happened many years ago, something involving your mother, but I never knew exactly what. What I do know is that before Sarah's accident, there was a tense atmosphere. Your father tried to keep everything under control, but..." Ana trailed off as if the memory still pained her. Elena remained silent, digesting every word. Samuel Donovan. She had never heard of him before. Yet, the mention of this name brought something dark to the surface. "Do you think he had something to do with my mother's accident?" The question came out before Elena could stop it, but the truth was that, deep down, she had always felt that the accident wasn't just a mere coincidence. Ana hesitated before answering. "I can't say that for sure, dear, but I remember Sarah being worried in the weeks before the accident. There was something bothering her, and I never knew what it was." Anna's words echoed in Elena's mind, each one adding more weight to her suspicions. Samuel Donovan, a rival with personal motives. Her mother disturbed in the weeks leading up to the accident. Everything was starting to fit together, but at the same time, the puzzle seemed more incomplete than ever. She looked at Ana, searching for more answers, but her mother's friend only shook her head sadly. "Your mother never spoke much about it. She thought she was protecting you all by keeping everything quiet. And do you think he's still out there? This man, Samuel?" Elena asked, her voice becoming firmer as the questions arose. Ana looked directly at her, her eyes filled with compassionate sadness. "I don't know, my dear. It's been many years since I last heard his name, but these things, these old rivalries, they don't die easily. If I were you, I'd be careful." The warning was clear, and Elena felt a chill run down her spine. There was something much deeper than a simple accident, and now she knew she couldn't rest until she uncovered the whole truth. Before saying goodbye, Ana held Elena's hands tightly. "Be careful, Elena. Sometimes digging up the past can bring shadows we never imagined." Anna's words resonated in Elena's mind as she left her friend's house. The afternoon was already fading, and the twilight shadows reflected exactly what Elena felt inside. A past coming back to haunt her, bringing with it a secret that was about to be revealed. Elena waited for the right moment to confront Lily. She couldn't be abrupt or seem suspicious. She needed subtlety. It was a regular day at the office, and she decided to call Lily for a quick conversation. The elevator doors closed behind Lily, and the sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway blended with the serene atmosphere of the afternoon. "Lily, may I speak with you for a moment?" Elena said calmly, as if dealing with a trivial matter. Lily, always polite, agreed without suspecting what was coming. In the small office reserved for quick meetings, Elena sat across from Lily. The room was illuminated by soft light streaming through the window, casting a golden glow on the walls. The air was heavy with an invisible tension that only Elena felt. "I noticed a brooch you sometimes wear," Elena began, carefully measuring her words. "It's a very beautiful piece. Where did you get it?" The question was asked casually, but her eyes were locked on Lily, watching for any reaction. Lily frowned slightly, appearing surprised by the question. "Oh, the brooch?" she replied, instinctively touching her chest where she usually wore it. "My adoptive mother gave it to me. She always said it was a special jewel, but I never knew exactly where it came from. She used to work in a psychiatric hospital years ago and said a patient gave it to her. Lily's face was calm, showing no signs of nervousness. The confusion in her eyes was genuine, which made Elena's heart tighten. Elena remained silent for a moment, digesting the words. Psychiatric hospital. Patient. The weight of those words didn't go unnoticed, but she knew she couldn't show how she felt. I understand, it's a unique piece. And your adoptive mother never mentioned anything else about this patient. Elena forced a smile, keeping the tone light, though inside her emotions were boiling. The pieces were starting to fit together in a disturbing way. Lily shook her head. No, actually, she never talked much about her work. She only told me that this brooch was given to her as a gift. I wear it because I find it beautiful, but I never thought much about its origin. The young woman's expression was serene, almost indifferent to the mystery that it represented for Elena. With every word from Lily, the mystery only deepened, and Elena struggled to maintain control over her own emotions. The air in the office felt heavier. Elena watched Lily's every move, every inflection in her voice, searching for some clue, something that would reveal more than just the brooch. But the young woman seemed completely unaware of the magnitude of what she carried. It's curious how things have such complex stories, isn't it? Elena said, trying to mask the anguish that gnawed at her inside. Yes, that's true. Maybe I should have asked more about it, but it never occurred to me, Lily replied, smiling gently as if the subject was insignificant. For a few moments, the two remained in silence. Elena, on the one hand, was processing the implications of what she had just heard. Lily, on the other, seemed entirely unaware of the seriousness of the situation. It was obvious that the young woman had no idea about the story intertwined with the brooch. And if she was telling the truth, the connection between the psychiatric hospital, her adoptive mother, and the jewel took on a new and disturbing dimension. When the conversation ended, Elena got up with the feeling that she was about to discover something devastating. Thank you for sharing, Lily. You can get back to work, she said with a polite smile, despite her mind racing. As she watched Lily leave, calm and unsuspecting, Elena leaned back in her chair, her thoughts spinning. The revelation about the psychiatric hospital, about the patient who had given the brooch to Lily's adoptive mother, changed everything. The truth seemed closer, but also more frightening. Elena felt that the next piece of this puzzle was about to be revealed, and she knew the answer lay in her mother's past, buried somewhere in that hospital. Now, more than ever, she needed to investigate. Something inside her told her that this story was far from just a simple family mystery. Elena spent the night wide awake, unable to ignore the whirlwind of thoughts that now haunted her. Lily's words echoed in her mind. A patient gave the brooch to my adoptive mother. Something was terribly wrong with that. The feeling that the answers were within reach but still veiled was suffocating. Without wasting any more time, she started a new investigation, this time focusing on psychiatric hospitals. She needed to find out the name of the facility where Lily's adoptive mother had worked and, more importantly, who the patients were. The silence of the apartment was interrupted only by the sound of Elena's laptop keys as she searched through old files, medical databases, and obscure records. Finally, after hours of searching, she found a list of psychiatric hospitals active during the period Lily had mentioned. One name stood out: St. Agnes Psychiatric Hospital, a mental rehabilitation institution that had closed more than 10 years ago. Could her mother, Sarah, have some connection to this place? Elena's heart raced. Determined, she began digging up as much information as she could find about St. Agnes. The photos of the hospital were grim, old buildings, walls worn down by time. In public records, almost nothing seemed useful. However, while exploring a more restricted database, she found something surprising: old patient reports. With trembling fingers, Elena scrolled through the documents until an unidentified name caught her attention. There was an anonymous patient, recorded only as Jane Doe, suffering from severe amnesia and psychological trauma, admitted to the hospital for an extended period. Elena's breath stopped. The physical description and dates matched perfectly. Jane Doe had been admitted right after the accident that supposedly claimed her mother, Sarah's, life. As she read the report, Elena felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. The woman suffered from memory loss and showed signs of extreme confusion about her identity. The diagnosis was clear. She believed she was someone else, someone lost among fragments of a life she couldn't recall. The description brought a wave of emotions to the surface, and Elena couldn't avoid the obvious conclusion. Her mother, Sarah, had never died in the accident. But why? Why would she be there, living under another identity, hidden from everyone who loved her? The report, dating back over 20 years, mentioned sporadic visits from a woman who seemed to have a mysterious connection to the patient. Elena now knew that this woman was Lily's adoptive mother, the nurse who had worked at the hospital. The ties between these women were closing in on a secret much deeper than she had ever imagined. The more she read the medical reports, the more clues emerged. Jane Doe had a history of escape attempts, always returning to the same place, a field near where the accident had occurred. Authorities believed she was reliving the trauma, but Elena knew it was something more. Something terrible had happened that day, something that was covered up. And that brooch, given to Lily's adoptive mother, was the key to uncovering what was behind everything. Elena's hands trembled as she went through the documents. With each new discovery, shock mixed with frustration for not having realized it sooner. The last entry in the report was the most disturbing. It indicated that Jane Doe had been transferred to an isolated wing of the hospital to be treated by external specialists. This was not ordinary treatment. Something dark surrounded this transfer, and Elena felt the weight of the truth approaching. What had they done to her mother? The reality began to crystallize in Elena's mind. Her mother had been kept alive, but in captivity, isolated from the world and from her own family. This discovery turned everything she had believed about the past upside down. The hospital, the nurses, the brooch, everything seemed part of a web of lies that had kept her mother away from the truth. She knew the next step would be to go there, to understand what really happened and confront those behind this monstrosity. But first she needed more answers. Something inside Elena told her that the connection between her mother and her father's business rivalry ran deeper than she had ever imagined. Elena stopped in front of the rusted gates of the old St. Agnes Psychiatric Hospital. The building, now abandoned, exuded an atmosphere of neglect and long-forgotten secrets. Each step she took along the dusty path brought her closer to the place that somehow had been her mother's prison for more than 2 decades. The broken windows and peeling walls seemed to whisper stories of pain, secrets that were about to be revealed. Elena felt the weight of the truth lurking, something terrible that she knew would change her life forever. She had managed to arrange a meeting with a former employee, a woman named Marta, who had worked at the hospital during the years her mother had been admitted. When Marta arrived, she bore the tired appearance of someone who had carried the burden of heavy secrets for far too long. Her eyes were small, squinting in the sun, but her voice was firm when she greeted Elena. "You want to know about your mother, don't you?" Marta began without preamble, as if she knew that this conversation couldn't be softened. Elena nodded, feeling her heart race. The two sat on a stone bench, under the shade of a tree that seemed as old as the hospital. Marta looked around as if fearing that the past was listening. "Your mother, sir. She wasn't here by accident. She was brought here by powerful people with influence who wanted her to disappear. It was all part of a revenge plan." The words echoed like thunder in Elena's mind. Revenge. Her father had always mentioned business rivals, but never anything so personal or dark. Elena could barely ask, "Revenge? What did my mother have to do with it?" Marta sighed deeply before continuing. "It wasn't because of your mother. It was because of your father. He had a business rival, a woman named Clarice Donovan. Clarice wanted to destroy him, and she found no better way than to attack what he loved most, his family." Marta paused, observing Elena's reaction, whose eyes were now wide open. Clarice Donovan, the name Anna had mentioned. Marta explained that, at the time, Clarice Donovan had lost everything in a business dispute with Elena's father. Clarice went bankrupt and swore revenge. But no one knew how far she was willing to go. According to Marta, Clarice staged Sarah's accident, kidnapping her and manipulating the circumstances so that everyone would believe she was dead. Sarah, who had survived the accident, was taken directly to St. Agnes, where, over time, her memory began to fade due to the trauma. Elena felt a deep nausea. She kept her here all these years, just to punish my father? The idea was inconceivable, but Marta confirmed it with a nod. Clarice used her connections at the hospital to ensure that your mother was kept out of reach. She was alive, but for all intents and purposes, it was as if she were dead. The horror of that revelation hit Elena like a heavy mantle. The woman who should have taken care of her after her father's death, who should have watched her daughter grow, had been brutally ripped from her life. Elena's mind raced, trying to process the depth of the betrayal. Not only had her mother been kept captive, but she had been the victim of a cruel manipulation that deprived her of her identity. And what happened to Clarice? Elena asked, her voice trembling with contained rage. Marta looked at the ground before answering. She disappeared shortly after the hospital closed. Some people say she fled the country. Others think that something happened to her. The answer was vague, but Elena no longer cared about Clarice Donovan. All that mattered was her mother. Marta paused for a long time before adding, almost in a whisper, Your mother never stopped fighting, you know? Even when she lost her memory, there was something inside her that made her want to escape, something that connected her to who she really was. Marta's gaze softened as if she wanted to comfort Elena. She never completely forgot about you. Elena felt a tear roll down her face, mixed with the fury and sadness growing in her chest. What was left of her mother now? Who was Sarah Bradford after so many years of captivity, lies, and a stolen past? She stood up, feeling her legs tremble under the weight of the revelation. Marta took her hand, squeezing it with compassion. Are you ready for what you're about to find? Elena stood in front of the door, her heart heavy and her hands slightly sweaty as she waited. She knew that on the other side was her mother, but the woman she would meet wasn't the same Sarah Bradford who had disappeared from her life over 20 years ago. Marta had made that clear. The years of captivity, manipulation, and pain had transformed Sarah. When the door finally opened, Elena held her breath. There she was, sitting in an armchair near the window, her hair gray, her body frail, and her eyes, which once sparkled with so much life, now seemed lost, caught somewhere between the present and the past. Sarah? Elena's voice came out as a faint whisper, barely audible. She didn't dare call her mother just yet. The woman in front of her turned slowly, her eyes narrowing as she tried to recognize the figure before her. Elena? She asked in a low, hoarse, and hesitant voice. Elena's heart raced at the sound of her name, but the confusion in Sarah's gaze made the pain cut even deeper. She didn't fully remember. The recognition was vague, fragmented. Elena took a few steps toward the armchair, the mixture of joy and sorrow pulsing in her chest. The woman before her was her mother, the woman she had spent years believing was dead. And now there she was, alive but deeply scarred by everything she had endured. Sarah seemed lost, as if struggling to piece together who she was. It's me, Mom. It's me, Elena, she said softly, kneeling beside the armchair, trying to reach out to her hand, a desperate attempt to reconnect the past and the present. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but confusion still clouded her expression. Elena, she repeated as if the name no longer made sense to her. Her fingers touched her daughter's face, but the touch was hesitant, distant, as if she were touching the memory of someone rather than a real person. Elena held her mother's hand more firmly, a gesture of someone trying to grasp something slipping through their fingers. The pain of seeing her mother there, so close and yet so distant, was overwhelming. You were here all this time. I thought you had died, Elena whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, as if those words brought some echo of truth but were unable to fully penetrate. I don't remember everything, Sarah said, shaking her head as if trying to push away a dense fog enveloping her memories. Sometimes I see faces that seem familiar but I can't piece them together. Elena felt a tear slide down her face, but she couldn't show weakness now, not when she had finally found her mother. I'm here and we'll get through this together, she promised, though she knew the emotional scars ran deep, and the woman her mother had become might never fully recover. The stolen time, the years of isolation, the weight of fragmented memory, all of it had turned Sarah into a shadow of the woman she once was. Still, there was something in her gaze, a faint spark of someone still trying to fight to remember. The pain of knowing her mother had spent years trapped in a silent nightmare, far from everyone and everything, burned in Elena's chest. But at that moment she knew that the healing process would be slow. Sarah seemed scared, like a child lost in the middle of a crowd. You were always so strong, Elena said, smiling slightly through her tears, hoping her voice, her presence, would bring back a fragment of her mother's past. Sarah looked at her, and for a brief moment, a glimmer of real recognition seemed to pass through her confusion. I always wanted to protect you, she murmured, and those words were like a sharp knife in Elena's heart. There she was, for a moment, the woman she remembered, the protective mother, the strong woman who would do anything for her daughter. But soon the spark faded, and the uncertainty returned to Sarah's eyes. Elena knew the road ahead would be long, but the fact that she was there, in front of her mother, even though the woman she knew existed only in fragments, was a start. Holding Sarah's hand tightly, she promised herself that she would fight with her, that she would help her mother find the pieces of her lost life. Even if they were just fragments, they were still there, waiting to be recovered, one by one. Elena knew that the meeting with Lily would be delicate. She had spent days pondering how to approach the young woman, how to reveal a truth that would change everything Lily knew about her own life. When she finally decided to call her in for a conversation, the office seemed quieter than usual, as if the space were aware of the gravity of what was about to happen. Elena felt the weight of responsibility but also the urgency to expose the devastating connection between their stories. Lily entered the office, her usual posture of timidity and humility evident. She seemed uncomfortable, as if sensing that this was not a routine meeting. Elena, on the other hand, observed the young woman with a heavy gaze, feeling a mix of compassion and pain. "Lily, I need to talk to you about something very serious. Something that involves the brooch you wear." The mention of the brooch made Lily's eyes widen slightly, but she remained silent, waiting for Elena to continue. Elena took the brooch from her bag and placed it on the table between them. "This brooch belonged to my mother," she began, her voice laden with emotion. "It disappeared on the day she had the accident, the same day I thought I had lost her forever. But somehow this brooch found its way to you." Lily looked at the object with a confused expression. She gently touched the jewel, as if for the first time understanding its true value. "My adoptive mother gave it to me," she murmured, still unable to connect the pieces. Taking a deep breath, Elena continued. "I discovered that your adoptive mother worked at the psychiatric hospital where my mother was kept, against her will." The words echoed like thunder in the room, and shock washed over Lily. She looked at Elena, incredulous. "What? My mother was part of this?" Her voice was a whisper, as if saying something impossible to believe. "She told me that a patient gave her the brooch. I never imagined." Elena watched Lily's face change from confusion to despair as the pieces began to fall into place. "She was an accomplice to a terrible crime, Lily. My mother was kept away from me for more than 20 years, imprisoned in a hospital without memory because of a revenge that should never have happened." Elena tried to keep her voice steady, but emotion overflowed with every word. "The brooch is the only tangible connection between us. It proves that you and I were somehow linked by this dark secret." Lily clutched the brooch tightly, her eyes brimming with tears. I didn't know. My adoptive mother. She was always so good to me." Her voice broke. "She raised me with so much love. How could she have been part of something so horrible?" The tears began to fall, and Elena felt a tightness in her chest. Despite everything, Lily was an innocent victim in a plot she had never asked to be a part of. "I know this is hard to hear," Elena said gently, placing a hand on Lily's shoulder. "You're not to blame for anything. But the truth had to come out, and now you know. Our stories intersect in ways we could never have imagined, but that doesn't mean you're responsible for what your adoptive mother did." The words were harsh, but Elena knew they were necessary. Lily's pain was palpable, and the weight of the revelation crushed them both. Lily cried silently, still holding the brooch between her fingers. "I'll never understand why she did this. I can't believe my own adoptive mother was an accomplice in something so cruel." The young woman raised her gaze, her eyes shining with sadness and shame. "I'm so sorry, Elena. I'm truly sorry." Elena took a deep breath, trying to contain her own pain. "This isn't your fault, Lily. But now that we know the truth, we need to decide what to do with it." Elena stood in the meeting room, her face hardened by determination and the weight of the evidence she carried. On the table before her were those responsible for her mother's nightmare. Clarice Donovan and the accomplices who had helped keep Sarah hidden all those years. The tension in the air was palpable. Elena held a folder full of documents, irrefutable evidence of her mother's kidnapping and captivity. Her hands trembled slightly, but her gaze was cold and unyielding. Today would be the day she demanded justice. Clarice, now older but still with an arrogant demeanor, looked suspicious. "So, what exactly do you think you can prove, Elena?" she asked with a sarcastic smile. The room fell silent. Clarice's accomplices avoided looking directly at Elena, knowing the truth was about to crash down on them like an avalanche. Elena took a deep breath before responding, her voice firm but filled with emotion. "I can prove everything. The kidnapping, the staged accident, the years of captivity, the involvement of each one of you." With a decisive movement, she threw the folder of documents onto the table. Photos, medical records, testimonies, it was all there, meticulously organized. Clarice looked at the papers with an expression that, for a brief moment, revealed panic. But she quickly regained her composure. "You don't know who you're dealing with," she said, trying to maintain control. "This all happened years ago. Who will care about a woman who disappeared so long ago?" Her words were laced with disdain, but there was a tremor in her voice. Elena leaned forward, inches away from Clarice's face, her expression cold and unwavering. "I care. And I won't rest until all of you pay for what you did to my mother." Her voice carried a silent but clear threat. Clarice shrank back slightly in her chair, feeling the intensity of the daughter she had underestimated. The woman before her was no longer the naive heir, but a relentless force seeking justice. The confrontation continued, but with each word, Elena felt the emotional weight increasing. Exposing the truth was painful but necessary. She recounted how Sarah had been manipulated, how her memory had been eroded by years of isolation. Each word was a knife twisting in the past, a wound Elena knew would never fully heal. Clarice, for her part, began to fall silent, realizing that the evidence was undeniable. She knew her empire of lies was crumbling. But as the truth was revealed, Elena began to realize something profound. The justice she had so desperately sought did not bring relief. Seeing Clarice and the other culprits humiliated and defeated did not erase the lost years, nor did it heal her mother's scars. The hatred she had carried for so long began to feel like a useless burden. Even with the evidence, even with justice on the horizon, the scars on her mother and her own soul would remain. Clarice was finally taken away by the authorities, along with her accomplices. The case, once buried in the past, would now come to light. But as Elena watched the guilty being dragged away, the sense of victory she had expected never came. Instead of the vengeance that had once driven her, there was only emptiness. The emotional cost of discovering the truth and confronting those responsible was far higher than she had ever imagined. Alone in the room after the confrontation, Elena felt the tears fall down her face. They were not tears of relief, but of a pain she would carry forever. Revenge, no matter how justified, could not erase the scars left by the past. The stolen memories, the life that could have been, all still weighed on her. And as she looked out the window watching the sun set on the horizon, she realized that her greatest battle wasn't with Clarice, it was with the lost time. The afternoon sun streamed through the large windows of Elena's apartment, casting a soft light over the furniture. Sarah sat in the blue velvet armchair, staring out the window but not really seeing what lay beyond. There was something distant in her gaze, as if she were still trapped somewhere between the past and the present. Elena watched her in silence from the other side of the room, unsure of where to begin. The reunion she had dreamed of for so long was happening, but it was different from what she had imagined. Sarah seemed fragile, as though the years of captivity had erased part of the strong and determined woman Elena once knew. She tried to smile, tried to connect with her daughter, but the emotional distance between them was palpable. "You used to like tea in the afternoons?" Elena said, trying to bring back a shared memory. Sarah looked at her, blinking slowly as if trying to remember that detail. "Yes, I think I did," she replied with a hesitant smile, but the emptiness in her eyes showed that the memory wasn't clear. Elena approached with a tray of tea, placed it on the table, and sat next to her mother. The silence between them was almost unbearable. There was so much to be said, so many questions to be asked, but Sarah's fragility made Elena afraid to push for anything. At the same time, the need to reconnect with her mother was overwhelming. "You know you don't have to remember everything right now," Elena said softly, handing her a cup of tea. "I'm here. We'll take it slow." Sarah held the cup with trembling hands. Her eyes rested on Elena for a moment as if searching for a reference point, something that could bring back who she was before all of this. "I feel like I lost so much time, Elena," Sarah said, her voice choked with emotion. "You grew up without me. All I wanted was to be there for you." The words came out fragmented, laden with regret and pain. Elena felt a pang in her chest as she heard that. She had always prepared herself for the reunion with her mother, but she had never prepared to see the guilt in her mother's eyes. "It wasn't your fault," Elena responded without hesitation. "They took you from me, from our family. But what matters now is that you're here. We'll find a way to rebuild what we lost." Her voice broke at the end, betraying the strength she was trying to show. The truth was that the lost time between them was a deep chasm. No matter how many times Elena said that the past didn't matter, her mother's absence had left marks on both sides. Sarah looked at her hands as if those words were difficult to accept. "I feel broken, Elena," she confessed, and the sound of those words hit Elena like a blow. The woman who had once been her anchor now saw herself as a shadow of her former self. "I want to remember everything, I want to be who I was for you, but I don't know if I can." Sarah struggled to keep her voice steady, but it was clear that the emotional effort was consuming her. Elena took her mother's hands in hers, ignoring their trembling. "You don't need to be who you were before. I just need you now in whatever way you can be. We'll find a way to move forward together." Her words were spoken with a tenderness that Elena rarely allowed to show. It was a promise not just to Sarah but to herself, a promise that she would do everything to rebuild what had been destroyed. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but this time, there was a glimmer of recognition, a small spark that indicated that little by little she was reconnecting with her daughter. "Thank you, Elena," she said, squeezing her daughter's hands more firmly. I'm so proud of who you've become." Those words, though simple, touched Elena deeply. As distant as her mother was, that phrase showed that, even fragmented, Sarah was still her mother. The silence returned, but this time it was more comfortable. Elena knew that the road ahead would be long and full of challenges, but the fact that her mother was still there, willing to try, was more than she could have ever hoped for. Together, they would try to find the pieces of the life that had been stolen from them. Elena looked at Lily from across the desk in her office. The young woman was tense, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes fixed on her own fingers. The silence between them seemed interminable, heavy with the weight of everything they had discovered together. The truth about Lily's adoptive mother's involvement in Sarah's story still hung in the air, unresolved. But in that moment, it wasn't about punishment, revenge, or resentment. Elena knew she had a choice to make. Lily finally raised her eyes, unsure, to meet Elena's. "I understand if you don't want me to stay here," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "After everything, I never imagined my adoptive mother could have been involved in something so cruel." The words came out with difficulty, as if the weight of the guilt Lily felt was almost unbearable. She was ready to accept whatever came, even if it meant losing everything. Elena sighed, looking out the window. The city continued in its usual rhythm, indifferent to the emotional turmoil surrounding them. When she finally spoke again, her voice was calm but firm. "Lily, nothing that happened is your fault. You were as much a victim as my mother. And in a way, our stories are now intertwined forever." Elena's gaze softened as she watched the impact of her words on Lily. "I don't see why you should pay for someone else's mistakes." Lily seemed surprised, her eyes filling with tears. I don't know what to say." She had prepared herself for rejection, but Elena's compassion caught her completely off guard. It was as if a great weight had begun to lift from her shoulders. Elena continued, "You have an entire life ahead of you, and I believe in second chances. If you want, we can start over together." Those words echoed in Lily's heart. A second chance. It was something she hadn't expected. Elena wasn't just offering her a job, but an opportunity to redefine her future, free from the shadow of her adoptive mother and the dark past that surrounded her. "I would like that, very much," Lily replied, her voice now stronger, though still tinged with emotion. For the first time in a long while, she felt that perhaps there was hope beyond the weight of the revelations. Elena stood up and walked over to Lily, standing beside her. "You're not alone in this, Lily. I'm rebuilding my life too. And maybe, somehow, we can help each other." It was more than a job offer. It was an invitation to walk together on a new and uncertain path. Elena knew that both of them carried deep scars, but perhaps together they could heal them. Lily stood up, still incredulous about what had just happened. "Thank you, Elena. I don't know how I'll ever repay you for this." Elena smiled softly. "You don't need to. We'll figure it out together." The two women were bound by a story they could never have imagined, but a new chapter awaited them. A new opportunity to create something from the wreckage of the past. As Lily left the office, a sense of relief washed over Elena. She knew that the road ahead would be difficult, both for herself and for Lily, but there was a kind of peace in knowing that they had each other. It was a new beginning, a chance to rewrite the stories that had been tainted by betrayal and pain. As the sun set, Elena looked out the window, feeling a small hope bloom within her. The past had left deep marks, but the future, finally, seemed to offer something more. A new beginning not only for her but also for Lily. And together they could turn the pain into something different. Strength, resilience, and maybe a friendship forged in the fire of truth. If you enjoyed the incredible story of Elena and Lily, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. If you love emotional chronicles and want to support our channel to keep bringing more quality content, consider contributing through Buy Me a Coffee. The link is in the first pinned comment. Your support is essential for us to continue improving. Thank you for your help. Until the next exciting chronicle.